43 seconds. That's how long it took for a wounded B-17 to vanish. Metal screaming engines, coughing smoke, 10 men, praying the sky would show mercy. It didn't. High above Germany, hunters learned a cruel truth: don't fight the strong, kill the stragglers. And for a heartbeat in 1944, the math of death was relentless. Then a nobody with an art school sketch and a stubborn heart decided to lie to the sky paint planes, to look broken, make weakness a weapon and drag the wolves into a trap. This isn't a legend. It's the moment war blinked first. If you're watching this on WW2 Secrets, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you first heard this story. Your voice keeps these ghosts talking. March 15th, 1944. Captain James Red Holt yanks his P-47 hard, left the Thunderbolt whining as oxygen fog ghosts the canopy. Below him, a river of aluminum 800 B-17 flying fortresses gulps the cold air and chews toward the Reich. 10 men, in each belly, a city's worth of ordnance in each bomb bay. Up here, the sky looks indifferent. Down here, it feels personal. The numbers bleed like bad arithmetic. Since January, the 8th Air Force has lost 284 heavy bombers. That's 240 faces that won't see Brooklyn stoops or Midwestern porches again. Fighter escorts like Holt's 359th can't be in every place at once. The Luftwaffe knows this. They have stopped trying to punch through the screens. They wait. They watch. They hunt the wounded. Damaged bombers become magnets. Feathered props, trailing smoke, a sagging wing signs that should have meant mercy now read as permission. Yesterday, Holt had watched a straggler called Memphis Belle II fall into a swarm of FW-190s and die in 43 seconds. Today, the intelligence report reads like a pattern. The Germans are avoiding healthy formations and pouncing 3 miles away from the escort rings, a brutal economy of risk. Escort fighters race, they arrive, and the moment is already a corpse. Holt mutters into his oxygen mask, "We're not protecting the right planes." It's a sentence heavy enough to carry the war. What none of them know, not Holt, not Dickman, not anyone in the 359th, is that 4 hours earlier, in a darker corner of the base, a 24-year-old crew chief with a Cooper Union degree and a past at J. Walter Thompson will doodle an idea on a cocktail napkin that will flip that calculus. It will be ridiculous the first time he says it. It will be brilliant the next. It will be paint theater and the oldest trick in a fighter's book: make your strength look like weakness. The sky narrows. Engines cough. Somewhere between the bomber stream and the cold earth, a different kind of experiment is about to begin, one that will teach hunters to fear bait. December 1943. Long before Holt's P-47s cut through that gray sky, a German ace named Joseph Pips Priller sat in a drafty operations room near Lille and wrote a single line that would tilt the balance of the air war. A healthy bomber fights. A crippled bomber runs. To Priller, it wasn't cruelty, it was logic. Predict the herd's behavior, and you own the hunt. By January, his doctrine had become gospel. The Luftwaffe called it Wolfsrudel, the Wolfpack tactic. German fighters orbited at altitude silent dots against the pale winter sun, waiting for the telltale stutter of smoke, or the slow rolling wobble of a wounded fortress. When one broke formation, they fell on it like crows on a carcass. No heroics, no fair fights, just the mathematics of inevitability. 73% of all bombers lost over Germany that month were stragglers, aircraft limping home with half a crew conscious or an engine gone. Radios crackled with pleas that never reached anyone. The Luftwaffe had begun jamming distress frequencies. Even when the Americans sent Guardian Angels extra escorts assigned to shepherd damaged planes home, the Germans waited until fuel forced those angels to turn back. Then they struck. Imagine the sky from both sides. A German radar operator in Würzburg squints at green phosphor blips, murmuring coordinates in clipped syllables. An American radio man hears only static, gripping his mic until his knuckles whiten. Between them stretches 300 miles of indifferent cloud, and somewhere in that gray desert, the predictable happens again. Fighter Command scrambles for answers, more armor, tighter formations, new radio codes, but each fix takes months, and the death curve climbs by the day. The war in the air had turned into a chess game, where one player suddenly realized he'd been teaching his opponent all his moves. Every flicker of smoke now carried a story, a wounded bird, an open invitation. And in a strange, grim symmetry, the Luftwaffe's new doctrine didn't just kill planes, it began killing compassion. When every act of rescue could become a trap, mercy itself became a liability. Somewhere a young sergeant with an artist's hands would soon decide to turn that cruelty inside out. February 28, 1944. The briefing room at Fighter Command feels like a pressure cooker. Cigarette smoke coils through the air, blue and bitter. Maps of Europe cover every wall, each one scarred with red lines and tiny black crosses, yesterday's raids, yesterday's losses. Major General William Kaptener leans over the table, sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched hard enough to crack a tooth. His voice is steady, but every man in the room can hear what's buried under it. Exhaustion. Helpless rage. "Gentlemen," he says, "the enemy has turned our wounded into bait." No one speaks. The silence is its own report. In just 2 months, the 8th Air Force has bled more bombers than the previous half year. Rescue attempts are backfiring. Every crippled plane that limps behind formation becomes an open grave for the crew, and sometimes for the fighters sent to save them. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Dickman of the 359th can't take it anymore. He slams his cap onto the map table. "They're using our wounded as traps." We see a limping B-24, we rush to help, and suddenly we're outnumbered 4-1, with fuel to barely get home. It's brilliant, it's ruthless, and I don't know how to stop it. The room doesn't argue. It just breathes heavily the way men do when the facts have already won. Someone quietly floats a proposal that makes stomachs turn. Maybe we stop going back for the wounded. Let the stragglers fall. Save the rest. Survival of the fittest, written in bureaucratic ink. That paper climbs the chain of command until it lands on Dwight D. Eisenhower's desk. The Supreme Commander reads it once, picks up a red pencil, and writes one word across the page: never. The word saves souls, but not lives. Losses keep climbing. Crews start praying not for victory, but for quick deaths. At least if you're shot down, it's over in seconds. Being damaged means 30 minutes of slow murder across a hostile sky while your friends die trying to reach you. Maintenance crews begin finding planes returned from missions with imaginary wounds, bullet holes the pilots swore they saw. Fear is a contagion, spreading faster than fire. Men wake up drenched in sweat, claiming to smell smoke that isn't there. Some request transfers to the Pacific, saying, "At least the Japanese fight fair." By mid-March, the war in the air has become a test of endurance and psychology. Commanders write memos. Pilots write wills. Somewhere among them, a quiet man with a paint-stained thumb is about to do what no general can change: the rules of the hunt. His name was Daniel Weiss, 24 years old, son of Jewish immigrants from Brooklyn, and as far from a soldier as anyone could imagine. Before the war, he worked at J. Walter Thompson, the Madison Avenue ad agency that sold America its dreams. He drew smiling faces for Pond's Cold Cream and Lucky Strike cigarettes, learning the art of illusion, how to make people see what you wanted them to see. When Pearl Harbor burned, Weiss tried to enlist as a pilot. Failed the eye test. Tried again for a bombardier. Failed again. Mild color blindness, the doctor said, stamping a form that ended one dream and started another. They made him a crew chief instead, a man who fixed other people's airplanes, kept landing gear oiled, and painted kill marks on fuselages. Weiss once joked, "I trained to be Rembrandt and ended up painting houses." But in truth, he studied every dent, every burn, every shrapnel hole with an artist's obsession. To him, battle damage wasn't destruction. It was language. By March 15th, he'd learned to read that language fluently. He could tell a near miss from a death sentence just by how aluminum bent in the light. And that night, sitting in the officers' club, a place where enlisted men weren't really supposed to be, He was half listening to Captain Holt drowning his grief in whiskey. Holt's voice rasped across the table. "They can smell wounded aircraft, Danny. Like sharks smell blood. How do you fight something that won't come near unless it knows you're dying?" Weiss wasn't really answering him. He was sketching the way he always did when words failed. A thunderbolt took shape on the napkin. He added smoke trailing from its engine, not quite real, too perfect. Bullet holes evenly spaced, theatrical. A cartoon of suffering. His pencil stopped. "What if," he murmured, "we make them think they have the advantage Holt didn't hear?" Weiss said it louder. "What if we make them think we're the ones bleeding?" The captain frowned, leaning over the napkin. The idea sounded insane. Camouflage in reverse. Paint planes to look crippled, let the enemy come closer, then hit back before they knew the truth. "We turn our strength into bait," Weiss said, eyes locked on his sketch. "They hunt the wounded, then let's give them a wounded animal with teeth." He didn't know it yet, but that napkin smudged with pencil lead and spilled bourbon would soon rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. Hangar 7 smelled like canvas oil and the faint metallic perfume of thousands of rivets. Under the bare bulbs, Daniel Weiss turned a maintenance bay into a prop shop. He didn't have engineers or laboratories. He had a motley crew pulled from the margins of the base. Corporal Tommy Chen, once a Disney animator, who thought in motion. Private First Class Marcus Wright, a Harlem stage makeup hand who knew how light lied to an eye. And Staff Sergeant Irene Kowalski of the WAC, who could strip a fender and weld a seam with gloved hands. Together, they set about an absurd problem: make damage that reads as death at 3,000 yards, but peels away at 100. The first fuss was depth. Flat paint reads fake. It has no shadow, no convincing edge. Wright heated cellulose acetate until it softened, then molded it into buckled aluminum painting microabrasions where a shell might have torn. Chen sketched stippling patterns, the telltale clustering of 50 caliber strikes, and they practiced the alchemy of scale. From a mile up, a carefully curved panel reads like a torn wing. Up close, it snaps off with a practiced tug. Smoke was a different science. Real engine smoke is viscous and black. A theater plume is wispy and white. Weiss reverse-engineered a captured BF-109's tracer system in theory, and adapted it into a belly-mounted canister that coughed theatrical smoke on a cockpit switch. Pilots could choose white or black duration and intensity, so the illusion matched the injury they wanted to sell. The trick was timing too much smoke and you looked fake, too little and you looked healthy. The final requirement was performance. A damaged bomber doesn't just look wrong, it behaves wrong. Weiss drafted a pilot's choreography: bleed speed by 40 knots, drop a few degrees of altitude feather, a prop occasionally, and hold a slight yaw. Captain Holt practiced the script until muscle memory smoothed the acting. The decoy flight rehearsed like a theater troupe, signals cues, the hairline moment when the smoke stops and the trap springs. All the while, a legal shadow hovered. Someone from JAG poked a cautious head into the hangar and asked gently where the line between camouflage and perfidy lay. Weiss could only answer with the workshop's motto tacked to a crate. "We are not false flagging. We are changing what the enemy sees." Lieutenant Colonel Dickman nodded once hard and stamped the Project Green secrecy absolute. If it failed, the men here would pay with their lives. If it worked, it would save others. They nailed the last assembly at dawn grease, under nails and coffee gone cold. The mock wounds gleamed under hangar light like stage scars waiting for their cue. Word spread faster than an official telegram can travel. Within days, Colonel Hubska of the 56th drove over to see what the 359th had cobbled together. He watched 3 P-47s limp across the sky, smoke trailing wings wobbling just enough to sell the part. Above them, a hunter element held fast like a coiled spring. When the decoys landed, Hubska didn't laugh. He leaned in and asked the one question that would decide everything. "Does 8 Fighter Command know about this?" The answer was a dangerous no, Because if headquarters learned too soon, they'd bury it out of hand. That demonstration brought eyes higher up the chain. On March 20th, Major General William Captainer arrived with a staff of a dozen officers, legal men, intelligence officers, squadron leaders, and one very nervous technical sergeant whose napkin had started it all. The briefing room at Bodmin tasted of stale coffee and adrenaline. Weiss stood and explained fake panels, controllable smoke, choreographed flight. He used phrases that sounded official, deceptive engagement, protocol, asymmetric response strategy, because sometimes language needs a uniform to be heard. The legal officer's face tightened immediately. "This is perfidy under Article 23, he said bluntly. "Using false signals of distress to lure the enemy is prohibited." The room snapped into argument. Some officers, bloodied by weeks of losses, wanted to try anything that would stop the bleeding. Others recoiled. "We are not the enemy. We do not bait the wounded." Captainer listened, his hand steepling. Then he asked the question that cut through doctrine like a scalpel. When the Germans developed tactics, specifically targeting our damaged aircraft, did they violate any convention? The legal answer was no. Targeting the wounded was brutal, unsporting, but not illegal. Silence followed. The moral scale had no tidy balance. "He's right," Captainer said, finally, voice low. "We have been reactive for months. This is the first proactive move I've seen in this theater. We will authorize limited trials, 3 missions. If casualties exceed standard escort losses, we abort. If the kill ratios don't improve, we abort. If the enemy adapts and nullifies the advantage, we abort. But if it works, every fighter group in 8th Air Force will be trained within 30 days. He turned then to Weiss. "Sergeant, do you understand? If this fails, men will die because of your idea." Weiss met the general's gaze without flinching. "Sir," he said simply, "men are dying every day because we have no idea. I'd rather try something than try nothing." Captainer allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Carry on," he said. The order was cautious, conditional, human, the kind of mercy that comes dressed as permission. The men filed out to prepare. The stakes were now official. The experiment had become policy, but secrecy was the price. No one was to speak of Hangar 7. No one was to write it in reports. If this worked, it would spread. If it failed, it would be buried with the men who'd taken the gamble. March 22, 1944. Mission 250. Schweinfurt. The town that made the gears of war sits under a thin blue haze, while 12 P-47 Thunderbolts roll for takeoff. 12 birds, 12 crews, but only 4 wear the theater's new costume. 4 are painted to look like funerals. 8 wait like wolves, hiding in noon sunlight. Captain James "Red" Holt leads the decoy flight, his Thunderbolt filigreed, with painted bullet holes, and fitted with a belly canister that sighs out white smoke on a cockpit switch. He falls back 2,000 yards behind the bomber stream and throttles back to an almost criminal 180 knots, slow enough to be tempting, fast enough to survive. At 24,000 feet, the choreography begins. Lieutenant James Fisher and the Hunter element hold position, eyes burned raw with strain, binoculars picking at the horizon for the gray shapes of enemy fighters. Holt breathes the part of feather of prop here, a slight yaw there, the practice stutter that reads as injury. From below and across the channel, German radar picks up a wounded fighter on a slow glide, a signal that has spelled death for months. An ace, a name whispered in their briefings as Bear scrambles 6 Bf-109s and sends them in. The attack is textbook 6 against 1, height advantage closing on a crippled silhouette. Bear's squadron locks in, mixing courage with the cruel arithmetic they've used for months. Holt can see them, a scatter of black dots. He can feel them, a pressure in his teeth. Every muscle screams to break, to run. Instead, he sells the play. At Fisher's call, now Holt slams the throttle forward. The smoke generator cuts. Fake panels pop free in the slipstream. In 3 heartbeats, the wounded bird is a fighter again, war emergency power screaming into an intercept climb. Sunlight catches polished gun barrels as 8 P-47s dive from above. The Germans have the moment between seeing and understanding measured in seconds. In that gulf, the trap closes. Gun camera film, later replayed until film emulsion bled, shows the suddenness of smoking silhouettes snapping into violence. Bf-109s, caught with their speed, bled away tracer knitting wings to ruin. When the dust settles, the tally is brutal and precise. 4 German fighters destroyed, 1, damaged, 1 pilot dead, 3 taken prisoner, 2, slipping home to tell a story. Not a single P-47 bears a fresh hole. Back on base, the footage is passed hand to hand like scripture. Intelligence officers watch the frames until the edges blur, trying to reconcile doctrine with what their eyes insist happened. Somewhere in Germany, a debrief circulates a warning to be cautious when a target looks too perfect. But the message arrives hours too late. In the space of 90 seconds, the sky's psychology has been punctured. Momentum came like an unseen wind. 2 days after Schweinfurt, the 359th ran 3 decoy sorties over Bremen on March 24th. 6 German fighters destroyed 2 probables. American losses: 1 P-47 with minor flak damage. On March 27th, 2 decoy missions escorted B-24s to Mannheim and claimed 8 German fighters. By March 29th, the tactic had multiplied 6 squadrons, trained a dozen decoys parading like wounded birds across the sky. The Luftwaffe answered with shock, not strategy. 17 of their fighters were lost that day. Bomber losses fell to the lowest levels seen in 3 months. The arithmetic bent under the weight of a single simple lie. Numbers, however, only tell half the story. In the hangars, grease-smeared mechanics noticed bays no longer clogged with bloodied wreckage. The sick call line at the base hospital eased by degrees. Mess hall conversation, once hollow with tension, began to pick up at dinner time. Flight crews, who had been counting backward on their fingers for months, found themselves booking another mission, another letter home. The human ledger balanced one life at a time. For the Germans, the effect was corrosive. Captured pilot. Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann, interrogated after being forced down on April 3rd, would later say something stark: "We cannot trust our eyes anymore. What looks weak may be strong. What looks wounded may be a trap." That hesitation, half a second at first, then a full beat, then a refusal to engage, was the true victory. Wolfpack doctrine depended on speed, certainty, and the willingness to pounce. Once doubt seeped into the approach, the whole attack geometry unraveled. A squadron that once closed on a limp fortress now circled at a prudential distance, searching for confirmation that might never come. Tactically, the Germans adapted by increasing standoff and skepticism. Operationally, the carnage receded. Straggler survival rates that had been frighteningly low began to climb. Genuine damaged crews found more chance to limp home. The Wolfpack, so effective for months, collapsed in 3 weeks, as the psychological cost of aggression outweighed the reward. What began as a one-hanger experiment had re-scripted an entire theater's assumptions about vision and risk. The decoys taught both sides a brutal lesson: the battlefield is not only metal and fuel, it is perception. And once perception shifts, doctrine must follow. By mid-April 1944, the decoy tactic was no longer rumor, it was doctrine cloaked in secrecy. Every fighter group in the 8th Air Force now had at least one squadron trained in the Weiss protocol, though the man himself still refused to call it that. Hangar 7 became more than a workshop. It was a school. Crews cycled through its doors carrying notebooks and skepticism, leaving with quick-release clamps, stage smoke generators, and a new creed written in chalk on the wall: make them believe the wrong thing. From England to Italy, decoy-equipped squadrons multiplied. The 9th Air Force adopted it next, then the RAF, who admired its audacity, and quietly renamed it Operation Phantom Wing. Maintenance teams became painters and illusionists, learning to apply fake scorch marks that could be stripped off and reapplied overnight. Some pilots requested one extra bullet hole for luck. Others kept fragments of peeled-off panels as talismans, reminders that sometimes survival hinged on the perfect performance. The results spoke louder than any memo. Between March 22nd and April 15th, bomber losses dropped nearly in half. Straggler survival rates rose from 27 to 73%. By the time spring rolled over the channel, the decoy flights had saved an estimated 180 bomber crewmen, 180 men who statistically should have vanished into the clouds. For once, the math leaned toward mercy. And then came the letter. It arrived at Bodney Airfield in June, forwarded through military channels to Technical Sergeant Daniel Weiss. It was written in a neat, nervous hand. Dear Sergeant Weiss, you don't know me. I don't know you. But on April 7th, 1944, my bomber took flak over Magdeburg. We lost 2 engines and fell behind formation. I called for fighters expecting none. Instead, 3 P-47s showed up, painted to look as damaged as we were. The Germans came. Your fighters were waiting. They shot down 4 before the rest ran. All 10 of us made it home. Because of paint. Because of deception. Because someone realized that looking weak when you're strong can sometimes be the only way to be strong. We're getting married next month, me and a girl from Baltimore. We'll have kids. They'll have kids. All because you thought differently. Thank you. Lieutenant Robert McIntyre, 301st Bombardment Group, Weiss, read it quietly under the low hum of engines, grease, staining the edges of the paper. He didn't show it to anyone. Just folded it once, slid it into his toolbox, and went back to work repainting another decoy. For him, that was enough. War changes men in strange ways. Some chased medals. Others chased meaning. Weiss found his in a single-letter proof that his lie had saved the truth of 10 lives. Stop. By the time the guns fell silent in May 1945, the record was indisputable. Between March 22, 1944, and VE Day, decoy-equipped squadrons racked up 247 confirmed kills with a staggering 6.2 to 1 kill ratio, the highest of any tactical innovation in the European Air War. Intelligence officers later estimated that 890 bomber crewmen survived missions they statistically should not have. Yet, officially, no one could talk about it. The tactic was buried under layers of classification labeled simply development of advanced camouflage techniques. For nearly half a century, Daniel Weiss's name vanished from reports. He declined. Promotions refused officer rank 3 times, and after the war quietly returned to advertising in New York. There, he sold refrigerators and razor blades, but never mentioned how he once painted death into deception. When a military historian finally found him in 1989, Weiss was gray-haired, soft-spoken, and almost embarrassed by the attention. It wasn't genius, he said. It was just seeing what people believe they see. Advertising taught me that. You want them to see what you want them to see. Across the ocean, the men who once flew under him remembered differently. Lieutenant Colonel Dickman, retired, a brigadier general, wrote, in an unpublished memoir, "We spent years designing better armor, better engines, better guns. A sergeant with a pencil and a paint can beat us all with psychology." Captain Holt, speaking decades later at the Air Force Museum, said it best, "People ask if I was scared flying as bait. Hell, every mission was scary. But that one I had control. I wasn't hoping the Germans missed me. I was making sure they saw me. There's power in that." Hub Zemke, the legendary commander who first championed the idea, called it the most innovative use of psychological warfare I ever witnessed in combat. The line between camouflage and deceit blurred forever that spring. When the files were finally declassified in 1991, historians realized they weren't reading a footnote. They were reading the birth of a new kind of warfare. Not technological, but perceptual. One where victory was measured not by speed or steel, but by how thoroughly you could rewrite the enemy's understanding of truth. The lesson outlived the war. The Israeli Air Force mimicked the tactic in 1973. The U.S. Navy used decoy ship profiles in the Gulf War. Every modern force that studies deception begins with a yellowed napkin sketch drawn by a man no one expected to change history. Because in every war, the deadliest weapon isn't always the fastest plane or the biggest gun. Sometimes it's a lie, painted in smoke and aluminum, born from the trembling hand of an artist who understood that strength disguised as weakness can save the world. When I think about Daniel Weiss and that smudged napkin, I don't just see a clever trick of paint. I see a moment when human imagination fought back against inevitability. In a world obsessed with bigger bombs and faster engines, a single idea reminded us that wars are still won by minds, not machines. Weiss didn't invent deception. He reclaimed it, turned cruelty into protection, and proved that creativity can be as powerful as courage. Maybe that's the real secret of this story, that survival often belongs to those who dare to imagine differently, even in the darkest skies. If you felt something hearing this, take a second to subscribe to WW2 Secrets and share where you first learned about this story. It helps keep these forgotten sparks of history alive and reminds us that even in war, art can save lives.